But the old bed of the former half of that large river, which is now called the Amu Darya, can still be seen by close observation. During the period of this second descent of mine in person, the country Tikliamish was considered to be, and indeed was, the richest and most fertile of all the terra firmas of that planet good for ordinary being existence. But when a third great catastrophe occurred to the ill-fated planet, this then most fertile country of the surface of your planet, along with other more or less fertile terra firmas, was covered by Kashmanun, or as they say, by sands. For long periods after this third catastrophe, this country, Tikliamish, was simply called Bare Desert. And now its parts have various names. Its former principal part is called Karakun, that is, Black Sands. During these periods, the second, also quite independent group of three-brained beings of your planet also dwelt on that continent Ashhak, on that part which was then called the country Maral Plesi. Later, when this second group also began to have a center point of their existence, they called it the city Gob, and the whole country was for a long time called Goblandia. This locality also was afterwards covered by Kashmanun, and now the former principal part of this also once flourishing country is called simply the Gobi Desert. And as for the third group of the three-brained beings of that time of the planet Earth, this also quite independent group had the place of its existence on the southeastern side of the continent Ashhark, opposite to Tikliamish, quite on the other side of those abnormal projections of the continent Ashhark, which also were formed during the second perturbation to this ill-fated planet. This region of the existence of this third group was then called, as I've already told you, Pearl Land. Later, the name of this locality also changed many times, and the whole of this terra firma region of the surface of the planet Earth now exists under the name of Hindustan or India. It must without fail be remarked that at that period, that is, during this second descent of mine in person onto the surface of your planet, there was present and already thoroughly crystallized in all these three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, belonging to the three enumerated independent groups, instead of that function called the needful striving for self-perfection, which should be in every three-brained being, also a needful but very strange striving that all the other beings of their planet should call and consider their country the center of culture for the whole planet. This strange, needful striving was then present in all the three-centered beings of your planet, and was for each of them, as it were, the principal sense and aim of his existence. And in consequence, among the beings of these three independent groups at that period, bitter struggles, both material and psychic, were constantly proceeding for the attainment of the mentioned aim. Well then, my boy, we then set off from the sea Kolhidius, or as it is now called the Caspian Sea, on Selchans, that is to say, on rafts of a special kind, up the river Oxoceria, or as it is now called, the Amu Darya. We sailed for 15 terrestrial days and finally arrived at the capital of the beings of the first Asiatic group. On arriving there, and after arranging the place of our permanent existence there, I first began visiting the Kaltani of the city Korkalai. That is, those establishments there which, on the continent Ashhark, were later called Chaihana, Ashana, Caravansarai, and so on, and which the contemporary beings there, especially those breeding on the continent called Europe, call cafes, restaurants, clubs, dance halls, meeting places, and so on. I first began visiting these establishments of theirs because there on the planet Earth, at present just as formally, nowhere can one observe and study the specific peculiarities of the psyche of beings of the locality so well as in just such gathering places of theirs. And this was just what I needed to make clear to myself their real inner essence attitude to their custom of sacrificial offerings, and to enable me more readily and more easily to draw up a plan of action for the attainment of that aim for which I made this second sojourn of mine there in person. During my visits to the Kaltani there, I met a number of beings, among whom was one I happened to meet rather often. This three-brained being there, whom I chanced to meet frequently, belonged to the profession of priest, and was called Abdil. As almost all my personal activities, my boy, during that second descent of mine were connected with the external circumstances of this priest Abdil, and as I happened to have during this descent of mine a great deal of trouble on his account, I shall tell you more or less in detail about this three-brained being there, and moreover you will at the same time understand from these tales about him the results I then attained for the purpose of uprooting from the strange psyche of your favorites the need to destroy the existence of beings of other forms in order to please and appease their gods and revered idols. Although this terrestrial being, who afterwards became for me like one of my kinsmen, was not a priest of the highest rank, yet he was well versed in all the details of the teaching of the religion then dominant in the whole country Tikliamish, and he also knew the psyche of the followers of that religion, particularly, of course, the psyche of the beings belonging to his what is called congregation, for whom he was a priest. Soon after we were on good terms with each other, I discovered that in the being of this priest Abdil, owing to very many external circumstances, among which were also heredity and the conditions under which he had been prepared for a responsible being, the function called conscience, which ought to be present in every three-centered being, had not yet been quite atrophied in him, so that after he had cognized with his reason certain cosmic truths I had explained to him, he immediately acquired in his presence towards the beings around him, similar to him, almost that attitude which should be in all normal three-brained beings of the whole universe. That is to say, he became, as it is also said there, compassionate and sensitive towards the beings surrounding him. Before telling you more about this priest Abdil, I must make clear to your reason that there on the continent of Ashark, the mentioned terrible custom of sacrificial offerings was at that time, as it is said, at its height, and the destruction of various weak one-brained and two-brained beings proceeded everywhere in incalculable numbers. At that period, if anybody had occasion in any house to appeal to one or another of their imaginary gods or fantastic saints, they invariably promised that in the event of good fortune they would destroy, in honor of their gods and saints, the existence of some being or other, or of several at once. And if by chance good fortune befell them, then they carried out their promise with the utmost